Hey gang, it is August 1st, 2018, and this is Brooklyn Pony Park 19. For those of you that have followed along, obviously there's 18 other videos that you have seen, and for those of you that haven't seen any of those videos, I suggest you go back and look at those. Basically, I'm going through the process of rebuilding a 66 Mustang convertible that was rusted to pieces, and a ton of Dynacorn parts. Everything's been assembled by me. I did start with a one-piece floor pan and worked my way up from there and salvaged pieces from the original car. So in this video, I'm just going to go over some things that I'm working on and what my plans are. You know, in the other videos, I think the last video I did was a wheel fitment and trying to verify everything is going to fit, because on the front suspension, you know, this TCI setup and the Mustang's Defeater frame rail bracing had some complications with that, so the wheel fit kit that I used took care of those problems. So at this point, what I'm working on is I want to get the suspension all in place and get some wheels, get this thing on the ground, and I'll show you what else I have in mind here. But that's the plan for this video. I know it's not going to be, it may have some good details in it for people, but it's just going to kind of I'll just have to play along with this one and show you what I'm working on and how things are going. Now at this point, what I've done, I've epoxy primed all of the new pieces that were installed, the torque boxes, the Mustang's Defeater stuff, and of course the front cross member and all associated pieces with that. Any of the welds I've ground down, any overlaps I've sprayed those. Any bare metal has been sprayed with epoxy. At this point, I have remounted the lower control arm on both sides and the upper control arm, and I want to get the spindles back on it. And in that process, I want to show you this. This is raw metal here. So the plan is I'm going to take all this apart, take care of this metal, obviously on both of these, put these back together and have those in place. I haven't decided yet if I want to try to paint the rack and pinion. I know that that's going to be complicated. Really, these things always have a little bit of residue on them, so it's kind of hard to deal with. There are a whole bunch of parts over here from Vintage Air, there's a front runner system, all kinds of stuff going on with that. And I have other pieces and parts, of course, but I also want to show you this. In this box is a performance automatic transmission, and this is what the owner had bought and sent to me. I haven't even opened the box, but I have looked at what comes in the box from Summit Racing, and it looks like a really good kit. We'll get into that more later. This is what it is. You can see that, and I know there's a control module and wiring and all kinds of stuff in there, but the difficulty with trying to test fit something like that is the fact that that's close to 300 pounds, and by the time you start, you know, putting it on a lift and doing all these different things, it's very cumbersome, and you know, you could mess something up. So thankfully, I have friends who build transmissions. So this is a hollow core of that same transmission. Now, of course, I'll clean this up a little bit, but this doesn't weigh much of nothing. There's nothing in it. So it's just an aluminum case, and that's going to give me my dimensions that I need. And I'll compare it, of course, to that one, make sure everything is exactly the same mounting wise, and go from there. But that should make this a lot easier. Also, this is a 351 Windsor block. Of course, we're putting a 347 stroker in this car, but the basics of this are the same. I know that, you know, the deck height, or the height here is different between the 302 and the 351. I'm not worried about that. All I need is basic block structure. So I'll be able to mount the transmission to it, use the engine mounts, and that'll help me verify all the fitment involved with getting this in place. So that'll be nice, and obviously make it a lot easier. So at this point, like I said, I'm playing with the spindles. I've got to clean those up, or repaint all that stuff and get all that back in place. I'll put all the shocks on it. Everything will go in it as a normal suspension. I did have it on back there. Of course, that is the what's that dolly body cart that I had it on, and at this point it's just too heavy for that body cart. So I took it all apart, and it's going to get on the ground on wheels and be able to move it around. And that's going to help me with everything else, getting everything mock in place, the steering column, everything associated with getting this back together. There's also some other things that are going to go in place. Custom seat belts with retractors. I've got the kit here, front and rear, so that's going to be put in as well. And just a variety of things are going to be happening. So I'm going to try to cover that as I go along. We'll see how it goes. And I will point out that air conditioner is doing a wonderful job. Well, this is interesting. As I said before, I was going to take these apart and paint, the main assembly, which is raw metal. And I've never seen this happen before. I don't know the tolerances of when they build these, but I've never seen this happen. Basically, this bearing is wedged onto this shaft. And, I've done tons of brake jobs over the years. And obviously, when you put that bearing inside of the rotor and then put the seal, then when you put everything together, it just slides together. And so I'm a little befuddled, I guess is the word, because I've never seen a bearing hang on. I had to pry it apart. I just took two pieces of wood here after I got some separation and put it between the rotor and this plate and flexed it, and it actually pulled the seal out of the back of the rotor. So that's just kind of baffling to me. I've never seen that happen. Anytime I've done brake jobs, you put the bearings in, just slide the rotor on. If you need to take it off, you slide it back off. You weren't going to slide this one off. I had to do some work to get this apart. So I have to figure out what's going on with this bearing. Okay, so I should have shown this, but I was just happy to get things back together. The problem with the wheel bearing fitting on the spindle was there was a little bit of a burr, like a machining burr left over, and I basically took a piece of fine sandpaper, real fine, and just wrapped it around the shaft of the spindle, and then rotated it back and forth and smoothed that out, and that took care of it. So I put everything back together, and as you can see, everything's mounted up in place. Everything's fitting for the most part okay. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to point out, as in other videos where I did the suspension, all the main stuff on this car, I had problems with bolts fitting or holes not being the right size, and had to address all that. And so I'm running into something a little bit different right here. This is the bolt that's supplied that goes through the shock and where it mounts to the lower control arm. Well, the reason they give you a short bolt is because of clearance issues between the inside of the A-arm and this bracket. And as you can see, it gives you 2, maybe 3 threads to use. And so that just, to me, is not correct. It shouldn't be like that. So I went to a local fastener supply place and I got some new bolts. These are 2 inches, and this is 2 1/4. So it's going to give me some more sticking out that I can use, and hopefully that addresses the issue. It's going to be a little bit of might be a bit of a challenge to get it to go in because of the gap there. So it's going to be really close, but I think I can take care of it with that. I still have other things to do. I have reassembled the differential, so that's going to get back in the car tonight yet, and then I can set the axles back in and work on getting this thing on the ground, because it needs to be sitting on its wheels so that the weight is on the body correctly, and that way I can do other things. So I'll just keep moving on, and that's where it's at the moment. As I continue to move forward with getting this car on the ground, I mentioned earlier about the problem with the lower shock bolt, and that I was going to have to try to do something with it. And I want to show you this on the driver's side. This bolt is what they provided me with. As I pointed out earlier, it's a little short, and even with a very short nut, I can't get a full torque on it, at least not where I'm comfortable with it. So what I've done, and I'll show you this. Alright, so the bolts that were provided for the shock mount are basically a 2-inch bolt, and as I showed you, there's not enough thread to be comfortable even using the the short lock nuts. So I went to a local fastener store and I picked up some 2 1/4 inch bolts, and these are also grade 8, so it gave me just a little more length. The problem with that is this bolt will not fit in the space that's available, and that's because the length is just too long to make the transition into the hole. I can show you that in just a second. So what I ended up doing was I had 2 of these bolts, and I took the second bolt and I actually chamfered this corner off a little bit, and I removed basically a thread and a half. You can just see there's just a little bit of difference in the length of these now. Now this one will go into that hole for the lower shock mount, and you shouldn't have to do this. I don't know why it's designed that way, but this is my fix. This isn't going to hurt the strength of the bolt. The face is what carries the load. This is just for the wrench. So let me show you how this goes together. Now again, this is the 2-inch bolt that was provided, and it clears and will make it through the hole, but there's hardly any threads on this side. This bolt is the uncut bolt, 2 1/4 inch. You can see, hopefully see, that there's no way that's going to go in. It's hitting the main frame of the lower control arm, and there's just not enough angle. So the bolt that I modified, where I chamfered the head slightly, I can angle it a little bit. The chamfer helps it clear the tubing, and also just gives enough room for the shock, but I can push that all the way through, and now I have enough thread there to catch with the shallow lock nut. Shouldn't have to do this. I don't know why this is so complicated. They need to look at this design and figure something out, because you just can't have basically 2 threads sticking out on the nut side. Now of course the goal at this point is to make sure that there's a bolt in every hole so that the suspension works properly. I also put in different bolts up here in the top, because the ones that came with it were really long, so I had to come up with some shorter bolts, which I did. Various locations underneath here, because I did all these modifications, I had to use longer bolts at this mount because I put these thicker blocks in, because the way it was designed. If you go back to the other videos that I made on this, there's no way I could have used the shorter bolts. Further back, the bolts that go through the strut, the torque arm, they were really long, so I got shorter bolts for that. I did add longer bolts in various locations where necessary, but I wanted to get everything bolted in place so that I can put this on the ground. You can see there's a bolt in every hole now. Now you'll see some thread showing, and that's because I stacked up washers. I did not want to have the locking, the nylock in the lock nut to be worn, so I'm just putting the washers on there to take up space so that I don't wear those out. Back here, shocks are in place. I actually had to get shorter bolts for the Panhard bar. The other ones were too long, I felt, so I got shorter ones for that. You can see the tightness between where this nut goes. This is one of the short nuts because you can't put a bolt in going that way, so it has to come from the front to the rear, and the big thick nut will interfere with that. Same thing over here, if you can see it or not. Not sure how well my lighting is helping. There you go. You can't put the bolt from the rear forward, so you have to go from the front to the rear, and you can see there's, hopefully see, let me get another light. That helps. I'm using that Braun light from Harbor Freight, but you can see that the bolt that's in there is really close to the trunk pan, but that's probably the one that'll be used. I may have to trim the threads off a little bit to help with that, but everything else is in place. The shocks, Panhard bar, everything that needs to be here. Now of course this is currently sitting without the axles in it, but they're going in next because I need to get this on the ground, and I can't do that without wheels. So that's where it's at. Everything seems to be working out okay, but I want to see how it looks when it's sitting on the ground. Well, as you can see, I have all these tires and wheels on the car. Now these aren't what's going to be used on the car, obviously, but it's enough to get it on the ground. So that was my goal, was to getting all this stuff back together so I could get it on the ground. And these tires are a little bit taller, of course, than what's going to be on the car when it has its regular tires and wheels on it. So let's get it down from there. Well, as you can see, it's on the ground. Sits pretty low, but it actually has some clearance. That's good. It did roll back and forth as you saw. So I can't wait to see it with the correct tires and wheels on it. It's going to sit lower than this, I know that. And there's still some adjustments that have to be made, like back here, adjusting the link arm. You know, it's close, but it's not rubbing on anything. So this is great. Now I can move on and get some stuff done. I really needed to have it on the ground so that I could do some more welding, do some more fitment, and mock up different installations, and this makes me happy. So this is the end of Brooklyn Pony 19. I know a lot of you have been anticipating this video or any videos in the series. It's taken a while to get stuff moving, and I'm just so happy to have it on the ground. This feels like a big accomplishment for me, and now I can move on, like I said, about test fitting different components, and mocking up the engine, transmission, all those different things that need to happen, steering column. There's still a lot to do, and I'm not sure exactly what the next video will cover, but you'll know when it comes out. So once again, thank you for watching. If you'd be so kind, give me a thumbs up. If you don't want to give me a thumbs up, well, that's fine too. We all have our reasons for what we like and don't like. And subscribe, share. That all helps with the processing and helps me out. So that's it. And stay tuned. There's more to come. Time for some coffee. Cheers. So basically, there's just not enough thread coming through to make a good, to make a nut. I'm gonna have some more coffee.